Look, judging from the press conference, there's several explanations for that appalling performance, the kindest of which is that he's delusional. You heard him say, in fact, in one of the throwaway lines, all the things he's been doing. You know, he said, as he said on Friday, that ISIS was not gaining in strength. Even his own Dianne Feinstein said essentially it's a delusion. Of course it's gaining in strength. And then he went on to say he listed all the things he's done. And he said a few weeks ago at the UN, I led a discussion on how to counter terrorism. Isn't that remarkable? Look, this is a guy who thinks that he's actually achieved things with these discussions. But the reason why I say it's the kindest of explanations, and incidentally, he listed, among other things, tightening up international security, especially on airplanes, and the putting of bombs on airplanes. This is, what, a week and a half after the downing of the Russian airliner? Has nobody on his staff told him that that actually happened? So that he listed as one of his achievements. But the reason that delusion is the kindest is, I think, the more likely explanation is he knows that our position is weakening. He knows that ISIS is strong and that it's a threat. But in the end, he doesn't think it matters. He's never thought the war on terror was important or existential.
How could you not, though?
Look, he has said this in his public speeches. He abolished the term. He gave a speech about 2 years ago in which he said we have to end this war on terror because of its awful effects on us, as if he can end it by saying it. Of course, that's what he thought he was doing in Iraq. He said, I'm ending the war. He didn't end the war. He simply quit.
But how can you say,
and watch it dissolve?
How can you say that he doesn't understand that millions of people are either dying, being dislocated, being tortured, being wounded, whatever it may be? He has to know that. It's right in front of him. Millions of people are affected, all right? And you still, Charles Krauthammer says that he doesn't care? He doesn't mean anything to him?
There's a difference between millions of people suffering and an existential threat to the West, which is what it is and which is what he denies. That's what he doesn't
All right,
want to
so what you're
acknowledge.
saying then is that he has adopted the philosophy of acceptable losses.
No, I think he has a deeper philosophy. And that is when he says, you know, the arc of the moral universe is long, but in the end it tends towards justice. He thinks radical Islam is a passing phase. It's an extreme of an extreme. It's not a threat to our way of life, that we got suckered in by 9/11 into expensive wars because we overreacted. He said that in his UN speech, that we overreacted and betrayed our principles. And he thinks that he wants to keep the U.S. out of this because otherwise we overreact. It's a quagmire we get. Look, he's telling the Russians in his press conference, he said astonishingly that what he's doing to settle the Syrian war is he said we have to work to convince Russia and Iran that the path they are pursuing is not going to work. As if, A, he can persuade them, and B, Russia and Iran do not understand their interest entirely, and that Obama knows them more deeply than they.
If what you're saying is true, if what Krauthammer is saying is true, then President Obama will go down in history as one of the most incompetent presidents that this nation has ever seen. Now, let's get on to the NATO situation. That's my solution.
Which I agree with you on that, by the way.
All right, that's a good start.
History will judge him for not only his denial and delusions, but for his misreading of the importance of what's at stake.
Okay, so you agree with me on that. Do you agree with me on NATO declaring war on ISIS and then getting this colossus organized to crush these people?
Well, first of all, simply as a sign of solidarity, the only time that NATO has ever invoked Article 5, which is what you're talking about,
yes,
an attack on one, is after 9/11. That was Europe showing solidarity with us. I think the least we can do is reciprocate and say that under Article 5, yes, it's an act of war, and yes, we are in this. Whether or not you get a formal resolution from NATO, I don't care. Here's what I care about. Can you get a force coming through Turkey? Remember, the Turkish border is not far at all from Raqqa, the capital. It is not a huge trek. In fact, the friendly Arabs and the Kurds are within 10 or 15 miles of Raqqa. You get a European and American force, not just Americans, but like in the Gulf War. And you come in from there. Obama says, oh, yes, but if I take Raqqa, what do? Perpetual occupation? Of course not. What you do is you get the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians. They're all Sunni Arabs. They're not Shiites. They're Sunni Arabs, which is what the Raqqa population is. And you get them to be the occupying force.
Just like a UN
and you
peacekeeping
leave.
force in Africa.
So this argument
Right.
about perpetual occupation is nonsense.
All right.
It's all a question
I'm
of
gonna
will.
predict
He
that-
doesn't have it.
I'm going to predict that he's going to have to do something, President Obama, but I could be wrong. Charles, as always, thank you. Directly ahead, we'll talk with the former CIA chief about how America is in danger, and we are. And later, Waters going to the University of Missouri, where things are totally out of control. Up ahead.
You can't predict the market.